I never imagined I'd be in this position. Looking back at the moment, I said yes to something I didn't even know I was capable of. I loved Daniel. I still do, in ways I can't explain. He was my best friend for years before we got married. We knew everything about each other. Or at least, I thought we did. Our marriage had been steady. Predictable, even. We had a house, careers, and a rhythm most couples crave. We weren't explosive with passion anymore, but we were solid. There were no major fights, no lies, just quiet stability. That kind of comfort makes you think you're immune to surprises, until one evening, we were sitting on the couch after dinner, wine glasses half full, and Daniel said something that didn't register at first. He looked at me, calm, steady, and said, "I've been thinking about something for a while." I smiled, expecting something about a vacation or remodeling the bathroom. Instead, he said, "I have a fantasy. And I want to tell you." I didn't flinch. We'd always been open. But when he told me what it was, my stomach turned. He said, "I'd like to see you with someone else. Just once. With someone we both trust." I laughed, assuming it was a joke. It wasn't. He looked at me with a sincerity that made my chest tighten. I said nothing. I didn't know how to respond. The next few days were filled with silence. Not from him. He carried on as usual. It was the silence in my own head that was deafening. Why would he want that? Wasn't I enough? Was he hiding something? I started replaying every moment in our marriage, looking for clues I'd missed. I brought it up a week later. Asked if he was serious. He said yes, but told me there was no pressure. "It's just a thought," he said. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to be honest." I nodded, even though I didn't understand. I couldn't tell if it was vulnerability or manipulation. I found myself watching him differently. Wondering if he was bored. Wondering if I was boring. He didn't seem detached, but now I questioned everything. Our sex life hadn't disappeared, but it was predictable. Scheduled. I started wondering if this fantasy was something deeper, or if it was just a symptom of how routine would become. He didn't push. Not in the obvious way. But every so often, he brought it up. A joke, a comment, a "what if?" One night he said, "If I could choose someone, it would be Nathan." That hit me like a brick. Nathan was his best friend. Divorced. Someone I knew well, but never thought of in that way. The fact that Daniel had thought of a specific person made it feel real. Too real. "Are you serious?" I asked. He nodded. "I trust him. And I trust you." I felt like I was being pulled into something I hadn't agreed to. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That disturbed me more than anything. It wasn't about Nathan. It was about Daniel. About what this said about us. About me. Was I selfish for feeling insulted? Was I prudish for not being more open? I started researching. Reading anonymous stories, relationship forums. Some couples thrived after things like this. Others fell apart. Daniel never pressured. That made it worse. It gave me room to think, and space to twist it around in my head until it was something else. I wondered if I could reclaim something in myself. If maybe this had less to do with him and more to do with the version of me I'd tucked away over the years. The version that felt desirable, spontaneous, wild. I began picturing it, not in vivid detail, but in emotional tones. Not with Nathan specifically, but with the idea of letting go. The idea of being seen again. Not as a wife. Not as a mother. But as a woman. That scared me more than the act itself. Daniel caught me watching him differently. He knew I was turning it over in my mind. He never asked for updates. Just waited. I don't know if that was patience or control. One night, I asked him if he was really ready for it. For the emotions. For the consequences. He looked at me and said, "I trust you to know your own limits." That sentence sat with me. Not because it reassured me, but because I wasn't sure I did. It wasn't about the act. It was about the permission. The door he'd opened. And the version of me that had walked through it without knowing who she was anymore. So I said yes. Not out loud. Not with confidence. But I said it in the way I looked at him. In the silence that followed. and he understood. I told myself I would back out if it felt wrong. I rehearsed the lines in my head, reasons to cancel, to delay, to pretend I'd changed my mind. But none of them came out when it was time. Daniel had arranged everything. A quiet evening, just Nathan and me. No expectations, just possibility. That word stayed in my throat like a pill I couldn't swallow. Nathan was polite when he arrived. Distant, almost too careful. We didn't talk about what was going to happen. We sat, shared a bottle of wine, talked like acquaintances who used to be close. I watched him, trying to figure out how he felt. Was he nervous? Or just trying not to show it? He asked if I was sure. His voice wasn't heavy with pressure. It was careful, but not robotic. He looked uncomfortable, but present. That made it easier, in a way. We were both pretending we weren't standing at the edge of something we couldn't come back from. I didn't answer directly. I just said, Daniel wanted this. Nathan didn't smile. He didn't flirt. He just nodded, like someone accepting a strange task. I hated that it sounded like a favor. Like a box being checked. But I'd already stepped too far into the night to retreat. The first time his hand brushed mine, I felt everything in my body pull backward, even though my hand didn't move. It was like standing in two places at once, half of me frozen in shame, the other burning with anticipation I didn't want to admit. When it happened, it wasn't passionate or cinematic. It was awkward. Quiet. Like we both knew too much about each other to pretend this was anything but strange. He kept asking if I was okay. I kept nodding. I didn't cry. I didn't moan. I didn't speak. I just let it happen. The room didn't spin. The world didn't tilt. It was a moment suspended in a silence I can still hear. I wasn't thinking about Nathan. I wasn't even thinking about myself. I kept imagining Daniel. Wondering if he was picturing this exact moment. Wondering if he'd ever be able to look at me the same. When it ended, Nathan didn't reach for me. He just sat up, silent, like he didn't know what came next. I stood and walked to the bathroom. Looked at myself in the mirror and waited to feel something sharp, regret, disgust, maybe freedom. Instead, I felt empty. Not broken. Just blank. I stayed there longer than I needed to. Long enough for the water on my face to dry. Long enough to wonder what part of me had shifted. When I came out, Nathan was putting his shoes on. We didn't say much. He offered a quiet, "Take care of yourself." I nodded. After he left, I sat in the dark and stared at nothing. My phone buzzed. Daniel. I hadn't even told him it was over. He must have known. Or maybe he didn't care about the details. Just the fact that I'd followed through. His message was short, "Thank you." 2 words. I read them over and over again. I should have felt resentment. Or betrayal. But I felt used. Not by Nathan. Not even entirely by Daniel. By myself. For agreeing. For going through with it. For waiting for it to mean something, and being left with nothing. I tried to sleep that night but couldn't. I kept replaying every moment, not because of the act, but because of the silence that followed it. The void that swallowed everything I thought I'd understand about myself. I thought it would make me feel powerful. Desired. Seen. It didn't. In the morning, Daniel acted normal. Kissed my forehead, made coffee, asked how I slept. I couldn't answer. He didn't push. Just smiled and handed me my mug. The same mug I drank from every morning. Nothing felt different. That was the strangest part. The world hadn't shifted. But I had. We didn't talk about it that day. Or the next. He didn't ask if I liked it. I didn't tell him that I didn't. We both pretended we were okay. But something had opened that couldn't be shut. Something in the silence between us. Something in the way he looked at me, softer than before, but more distant. That week, Nathan texted me once. Just a simple message, "Hope you're okay." I didn't respond. What was there to say? That it happened? That I let it? That I regretted it, not because of him, but because of what it revealed about everything I thought I could handle. I deleted the message. Deleted the chat. I wanted it gone. But it stayed anyway, in the air, in my mind, in the quiet between each breath. What bothered me wasn't that I had done it. It was that a part of me wanted to do it again, just to feel something. And that terrified me more than the night itself. The days that followed were quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. Daniel went about life as usual. Coffee in the mornings, work calls in the afternoon, dinner at 7. He didn't ask questions, didn't analyze, didn't bring up what had happened. I couldn't decide if that made it better or worse. I kept waiting for some kind of fallout, a confrontation, a confession, anything, but it never came. Instead, he seemed lighter. As if some strange burden had been lifted from him. He was more affectionate, more present. He kissed my cheek more often. Touched my lower back when he passed behind me in the kitchen. It felt rehearsed, like he was trying to prove to himself, and to me, that everything was fine. I didn't feel fine. I felt displaced. Like someone had rearranged the furniture in my mind and now I couldn't find my way around. I kept searching for the emotion I was supposed to have, guilt, anger, shame, but what I felt most was confusion. Not about what I'd done, but about why I didn't feel more broken by it. One night, while we were lying in bed, I asked him if he was really okay. He turned to me, calm as ever, and said, "It was something I wanted. And you gave it to me. That means a lot." His voice was so steady, like he was proud of me. It made my stomach twist. I asked him if he felt jealous. If it hurt him at all. He shook his head. Not in the way you'd think. I knew it would affect us, but I also knew we could handle it. I wanted to scream. Handle what? We hadn't even talked about it. We'd just let it sit between us like something we were both pretending wasn't rotting in the corner. I started pulling away. Not out of punishment, but because I didn't know how to be close to him anymore. I couldn't fake normal. I couldn't look at him without remembering what he had asked of me, and how easily I had done it. I didn't trust his calmness. It felt like he was watching me process everything just to see if I'd fall apart. I spent more time out of the house. Took long walks. Sat in the car after errands just to avoid going inside. At night, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was what collapse looked like, silent, undramatic, gradual. I couldn't even blame him. He hadn't lied. He hadn't cheated. He'd simply asked, and I'd agreed. Eventually, I told him I needed space. He didn't fight it. He just nodded and said, "If that's what you need, I'll give it to you." His lack of resistance made me feel disposable. Like he'd already prepared for this outcome. Like he knew something I didn't. I moved into the guest room. He didn't ask how long I'd be there. We started talking less. Small talk only. Groceries. Bills. Logistics. The intimacy had been amputated, and neither of us reached for a tourniquet. I started seeing a therapist. I told her everything. Her expression didn't change. She asked if I felt coerced. I said no. I told her I'd consented. That I'd been curious. That part of me wanted to do it. She nodded and said, "Consent doesn't cancel consequence." That stayed with me. I wasn't mourning the act. I was mourning who I used to be before I allowed it. I kept asking myself why I'd said yes. Was it to please him? Was it to feel alive? Was it to test whether we were really unbreakable? Or had I already sensed that something in us had fractured long before that night? Nathan never reached out again. I was grateful for that. I didn't want to revisit it. I didn't want to apologize. He hadn't done anything wrong. Neither had Daniel, technically. But I still felt betrayed. By both of them, in different ways. And by myself, most of all. Months passed. Daniel and I functioned like co-workers sharing a house. Polite. Respectful. Detached. I stopped trying to repair what we had. I wasn't sure I wanted it back. I missed something, but I didn't know if it was him or just the feeling of being sure about us. We sat down one evening, and I asked him plainly, "Did this change how you see me?" He paused, then said, "It showed me how much you trust me." I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. That wasn't trust. That was surrender. He asked if I hated him. I said no. I didn't. I just didn't know if I loved him in the same way anymore. Something inside me had turned cold, not out of anger, but because too much had been exposed. Some fantasies shouldn't be fulfilled. Not because they're wrong, but because they leave nothing behind once the mystery is gone. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if we'll stay married, or if we'll quietly unravel and go our separate ways. What I do know is this: I did something I never thought I'd do. I let go of every boundary I believed made me who I was, just to see if I could. And I learned that once a line is crossed, it doesn't go back to where it was. It becomes part of the ground beneath your feet. Daniel had a wish. I said yes. And now I live with the version of myself that came out the other side. Not ruined. Not heroic. Just changed. And no one prepares you for how permanent that change can feel. People always talk about closure like it's something you find. Like a switch you flip once you've processed enough pain, or cried the right amount of tears. But closure doesn't come in neat packages. Sometimes it never comes at all. What came instead was a slow, quiet understanding that I had become someone else, and I couldn't go back. Daniel and I continued living in the same space, but emotionally, we had drifted into different orbits. He stopped asking questions. I stopped offering answers. We both knew something had cracked, but neither of us reached for the glue. There was no fight. No dramatic breakdown. Just silence. That made it harder, in a way. When something dies loudly, you can bury it. When it fades slowly, it haunts you. I started journaling. Not because I wanted to remember, but because I wanted to figure out where I had lost myself. I traced it back to that night, but the roots were deeper. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking for more. I settled for peace instead of passion, comfort instead of connection. I think Daniel did the same. The strangest part was that we still functioned. We didn't hate each other. There was no resentment left to burn. But the emotional closeness, the vulnerability, that was gone. What was left was two people who once knew each other completely, now navigating around memories like fragile glass. One morning, he made breakfast and placed it in front of me without a word. I thanked him, and he smiled like everything was normal. I stared at the food, wondering how many more days would go by with us pretending we were okay. I didn't eat. It wasn't the act itself that ended us, it was the silence that followed. The permission that was given, the boundary that was erased, the lack of acknowledgement afterward. I would have forgiven the moment. What I couldn't forgive was how disposable I felt after it. As if I'd just played a role and stepped off stage. No curtain call, no applause, just the sound of the lights going out. Friends started to notice the change. They asked how we were doing, and I lied with practiced ease. We are good, just busy. No one pushes beyond that. They didn't see the distance. Or maybe they did and didn't want to be the ones to name it. Eventually, I brought it up again. Asked Daniel if he ever thought we'd recover. He paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he knew the answer wasn't kind. I think we are different now, he said. Not better? Not worse. Just different. I nodded. It was true. But different doesn't always mean sustainable. He admitted something that stayed with me. He said he thought the experience might bring us closer. That seeing me in that light, desired by someone else, would reignite something in him. That he imagined a kind of emotional intimacy blooming from it. What he got instead was distance. What I got was silence. I think he regretted it, but not in the way I expected. He didn't regret asking. He regretted not understanding the cost. And I regretted thinking I could do something so big and remain unchanged. We were both wrong, just in different directions. The longer we stayed in limbo, the more I realized that healing wouldn't happen together. We had reached a point where even kindness felt hollow. We were too polite. Too careful. No one wanted to make the first cut, but the bleeding had already started long ago. I asked for a break. Not out of anger. Just necessity. I needed space to think, to breathe, to feel like myself without the weight of his wishes. He didn't argue. He asked where I would go. I told him I didn't know. Maybe a friend's place. Maybe just away for a while. He nodded and said, "Take whatever time you need." There was no goodbye. No tears. Just a quiet mutual understanding that we had reached the end of something, even if we hadn't signed the papers yet. I packed light. I left a note, not because I had to, but because I wanted him to know it wasn't hate that made me leave. It was the absence of everything else. In the weeks that followed, I learned how to sit with silence without letting it crush me. I didn't rush to fill the emptiness. I let it stay. I let it teach me. I realized I had built my identity around someone else's comfort, someone else's fantasy. And when I fulfilled it, I was the one who disappeared. I didn't blame Daniel anymore. Not fully. We both made choices that chipped away at us. His wish, my yes, they were both part of the unraveling. No villain. No victim. Just a couple who tested their limits and found nothing waiting on the other side. One night, I wrote him a letter I never sent. I told him that I hoped he finds what he's looking for, but that I could no longer be the person who bends to fit into someone else's desire. I told him that I loved who we used to be, but not who we became. Maybe one day we'll speak again, not as husband and wife, but as people who tried. Who risked more than they realized. Who learned.